right, it is 12 o'clock, and I am Tom Fulkerson, and I welcome you to our Broker Talk Time Q&A. Today, we are going to be reviewing our broker-to-broker compensation forms. And I'm sure we're going to have some more people hop on this call here shortly, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So, Stephen, if you'll go to the first slide, that'd be great. All right, this is a review for you guys so that we're still getting a lot of questions about this. So I don't think we can hit this topic too very often. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that you all are up to date on this. So if you are showing property to a buyer, I want you to always request the pre-showing compensation agreement from the seller's agent before showing and before writing an offer, and provide a copy to the buyer. This pre-showing compensation is the F-258. It discloses what the listing agreement says regarding any buyer broker compensation that may be paid directly by the seller or shared by the seller's broker from the amount they are being paid. If the first box under Section B is checked, the seller must sign. That is compensation being offered to buyer's broker. And so on this form, the seller will need to sign that because they're the one paying the compensation. Guys, please understand these have an expiration date. And I recently dealt with a situation where the expiration of the pre-showing compensation agreement terminated in November. The agent didn't ask for an updated pre-showing compensation agreement, nor did they write the F-258 into their contract. And so they were not paid any compensation by the seller as a result of that. So very important that you adhere to that and make sure that the expiration date is still valid on the pre-showing compensation agreement if you're writing that offer. Make sure, what I just said, point number 3, make sure that the date on the top of the form and the number of days in the first paragraph indicates it's still alive at the time you negotiate the purchase and sale agreement. All right, on to the next slide. It is very important that the seller sign this document if the first box under Section B indicates that the seller is paying the buyer broker compensation directly. And so the seller really needs to make sure that they are signing that. You need to make sure that the seller's signing it. If the seller is paying the buyer broker compensation directly, as stated in their seller brokerage engagement agreement, then they must sign an agreement like this, the F-258 or the F-259 exhibit, with their agent as well as the buyer's agent in order to legally obligate them to pay the buyer brokerage compensation. Any questions so far? Remember, this is a Q&A session, and so without any Q's, there's no A's. So please ask questions if you need to ask questions.
Tom, I had a question. If as the listing agent, if I already have the F-258, it's not obviously in the listing, but I have it, and I leave a copy of it at the listing for agents to see. If it hasn't expired, but it's still from last year, do I need to update it? The 2025 document?
I would say yes. At this point, it needs to be updated because the 2024 forms, although they are valid through the end of January, as of February 1st, they are no longer valid forms.
Thank you. I will do that today.
All right. All right, on to the next slide, please. All right, this is the F-259, the buyer's broker compensation agreement exhibit. I always would say and here, even if you have a 258, I would go ahead and add this, even though it's not necessary. I believe that I would side on the air of caution and go ahead and add it to my offer anyway. The new title specifying buyer's broker only, seller's broker compensation has been removed for the 2025 form. So only select option A if you have information from the seller's broker that they have a gross commission, negotiated with the seller and are sharing X% of the sales price with the buyer's broker, and you just need to affirm this in writing. If you do not have a fully signed F-258 pre-showing compensation agreement, then this form is recommended as an exhibit to the purchase and sale agreement if the buyer wants seller to pay the buyer's broker. When in doubt, choose paragraph B that the seller will pay the buyer's broker directly. We haven't had a whole lot of issues with this. It's been pretty cut and dry. With few exception, we're still seeing mainly that the listing agent is sharing their commission with the buyer's agent. So, but if not, then make sure that you fill these forms out appropriately based on what the seller is paying. All right. Any questions about this? Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. This is the instructions to closing attorney. We are now required, like last year, there was a lot of questions about whether this document was even required or not, but it is now required because they've taken away on the F-259, they've taken out the listing agent's compensation. And so this document is for the attorney so that they have the information they need to pay you at the closing table. The instructions to closing attorney, aka compensation confirmation form, is required even if you have the 259 compensation exhibit or the F-258 pre-showing compensation agreement signed. This document is typically signed after a binding purchase and sale agreement is signed. If the seller's agent is being paid a gross amount of compensation and sharing it, then paragraph 1 and 2 are filled out and the seller is not required to sign it. However, if the seller is paying each broker their compensation separately, then paragraphs 1 and 3 are filled out and the seller must sign the document. On to the next slide. So this is page 2 of our instructions to closing attorney. And if there are any referral fees paid out at closing due to another brokerage, closing to another brokerage, or any contributions, rebates from either broker's compensation to the buyer or seller, it's got to be disclosed in paragraph 6, which is at the top of page 2 of the form. If the seller is directly paying each broker their compensation in paragraphs 1 and 3, then the seller must sign it. If the buyer is paying any portion of the buyer broker's compensation directly, then it must be indicated in paragraph 4 on page 2, and the buyer must sign, and this F-255 must be sent to the lender ASAP because they must source where the buyer's funds to pay the compensation is coming from. I'm starting to see some examples of this where the buyers are having to come out of pocket and pay 0.5% or even up to 1%. And so the buyer has to sign. The lender really has to be made aware of this, guys, because if not, there could be some problems if the buyer hasn't sourced those funds with the lender. Any questions about this? Okay. Then we will go on to the next slide, which that was it. All right. So while I have you all on the phone, I want to remind you, I had an issue coming up this morning. All of your signage all of your advertising must be approved by the broker. So I have a situation now where unfortunately there's an agent who's going to have to redo their signs because they have no mention of Keller Williams on their sign, nor do they have the office's phone number. And so that is a problem. And so while it's on my mind, I just want to remind you guys before you go and have printing done or signage or anything advertising wise, please make sure that either Angie or I review it and approve it so that you don't have to redo it or get in trouble. Okay. Any other questions from you guys? This has been a very short broker chat today. I will be teaching Contracts 101 Part 2, which is the purchase and sale agreement at 1 o'clock. And I hope that you can join me. And if there are no questions or then I will thank you for joining me, and we will see you next time on Broker Chat.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
All right, my pleasure. Have a good day.
You too.